Welcome back to Relate Humanly. I'm Rob Nuttleman, your host. We're talking about HR issues, conflict resolution issues, all those wonderful things. Today's guest, I'm excited, is Darcy DeCoite. She's the owner of One Resource Consulting, a boutique HR consulting firm in the San Francisco Bay Area. She specializes in employment law compliance and management consulting. I've known Darcy for several years now. I've referred a number of clients to her, and I get some pretty darn good feedback. So I'm excited for today's conversation. So sit back, grab yourself something to drink, and we'll get started. Darcy, welcome. It is good to see you again. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm living the dream. And it's one of those wonderful, wonderful weeks. It's always a pleasure to see you. So I mentioned to the audience, you are an HR consultant. How did you come to be an HR consultant?
Well, I sort of fell into it. I was, working in HR. I just sort of moved from San Diego to here and kind of was needing some work when I moved to town and just happened to get a job doing consulting that someone had referred me to. And then that led to a company I was working at that was what they specialized in. So over a period of years, I just got thrown to the fire and learned that consulting was sort of its own niche thing and the level of need for that, especially in this area. So, and small businesses. And I sort of fell in love with it, felt a lot of great relationships with my clients, and eventually just started my own business doing this.
So like the clients that One Resource Consulting does, small clients, big clients, what's kind of your niche or the ones that really you love working with?
Small businesses and nonprofits. I work with some clients that are sort of medium sized, but I really feel like at some point I'm just trying to convince them to hire an HR person. So, I'm hoping that I'm just a temporary solution. But yeah, small businesses, it's really hard for them to justify a full-time HR person. So a lot of times it ends up being their accounting person, their office manager, their operations director, and none of them are actually experienced with HR. So, and to keep up with the compliance in California is nearly impossible if you're not an actual professional in that field.
Yeah, as an employment attorney, obviously, it's my job to keep on top of the employment laws. And I, like you, I act like an outside HR person for a lot of my clients. But I'll be honest, attorneys, we're not the least expensive alternative. And there are a lot of things where I think the HR consultant is a much better fit. What I like, what you bring to the table is you're that gap. There's this large gap between a small company that needs a little bit of assistance and a company that needs a full-time HR person. And you can provide that little, that really good niche. And size doesn't necessarily matter, like as far as number of employees. I've seen situations where you can come in as an HR consultant of they have an HR team, but maybe the HR team doesn't have quite the skills they need for whatever problems they're facing.
Yeah, I do sometimes advise HR managers. It's not as many, but those that do, I can just tell they just want to pick my brain. So a lot of times they'll reach out because it's a very complicated compliance issue, or they just want to sort of have somebody to bounce off of and make sure that they're not crazy.
And I'm assuming some of the issues that you've dealt with, leave of absence issues, wage and hour issues, conflict issues. One of the things that I think kind of comes up over and again, I'm seeing it more and more, I guess more recently, is how to manage managers. I mean, oftentimes we have a good employee and that employee's done a good job and we put them in a management role and kind of the wheels start to fall off at that point in time. And I'm curious as to what's your experience with managers that maybe aren't ready to be managers or need a little bit of help?
Yeah, I mean, I deal with that a lot. That's a big issue. A lot of times, who I'm working with is management. I don't work directly with the employees, so I'm coaching managers. And I really find out when they drop the ball. And then I have to deal with their manager, which is the owner or some sort of executive position. And we're saying, well, what about the manager? They're the ones responsible for this, right? They should be accountable. And they're kind of at a loss with that. They go, oh, I don't know. Well, what am I supposed to do there?
Hmm.
So nobody wants to really touch that. They don't want to have to manage a manager.
Hmm.
And then sometimes they'd either be brand new, like you said, and they don't really know what they're doing. They've just been given that role. Or they'd come over many years of being a manager, but who knows what their actual experience was with that, right? They could have been doing it wrong this whole time.
Hmm.
So basically, the problem is the higher ups don't feel comfortable telling them what to do, but somebody needs to.
And part of that might
So,
be the upper management is like, well, I want to give this person the autonomy, but at the same time, maybe their style is not coinciding or going well with what we need or what we're trying to get. And
yeah.
so, do you like one-on-one training with the managers? How do you address those?
So I let the managers reach out to me, and some of them they have that kind of situation where they'll call me. We'll work through things together, and other times it'll be sort of a pass through. So I prefer if those managers can reach out to me. And that's where I feel like there's not enough of them who do have that autonomy. And I wonder why they're even managers to begin with. Right. So, I mean, I think that that's something that a lot of owners and upper management need to sort of figure out. But I'm there to sort of ideally teach them how to fish. And if they're capable, great. Because if they're not, they're the reason that there's problems. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the reason that a lot of lawsuits even happen is because of something a manager did or didn't do?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I think the number one reason that an employee goes to talk to an employment attorney is because they think they're treated unfairly. Usually that's going to be coming from a manager or an owner or somebody in the higher ups that is, oh, they put me on a performance improvement plan, but I was doing fine. And, or I think, I just got back from a leave of absence and now they're treating me differently. And how do we want to, how do we address that? What are some of the skills that you think are really critical for a manager to be effective?
Well, one thing I see missing a lot is the follow through, right? So they need to document things as much as possible. And I think you know in this day and age how important it is to have documentation to prove your side of the story, meaning management's side of the story. And they fail to do that a lot. And then they fail to follow through with the employee, right? So I do think that that kind of level of responsibility is necessary, and not someone who will just, put their head in the sand or just sort of throw up their hands like this employee is just terrible. So they need to know how to lead. And I don't know why that would seem like it's pretty obvious already, right? So I don't know why they wouldn't be already looking for someone who knows how to lead, but it's shocking how many times I feel like people are put in a leadership position without leadership skills or the understanding that it is their responsibility to lead, to mentor, and to guide employees, provide training if necessary, and not just expect them to know what they're doing and always be responsible for themselves.
Leadership takes many different forms. There are leaders that lead by dictatorship, which I think is really ineffective. Do what I
Yeah.
say because I told you to do it. There are
Hmm.
those that lead from behind and sometimes let employees go too far off the rails before making corrections. And then there's leaders that are kind of in the trenches. And I see those different styles. And sometimes it's about teaching the managers other alternative ways. For me, a lot of times it comes down to the communication. I love what you said about the follow through, right? Employee has an issue, they go to the manager talks with them. What about that follow through to show, next, a week from now, 2 weeks from
Yeah.
now, how did that go and what's going on?
Yeah. And so that, I mean, that can take a few forms too. Was it a complaint? And then you dealt with the employee who was complained about, but forgot to go back to the employee who made the complaint? Or, is it that an employee's, having some issues and you kind of told them what they needed to do, but then didn't any follow through? So yeah, there's a lot of times when I feel like a manager um, needs to understand that they're a little more responsible for their staff. And when things go wrong, they can't just blame the employee because you've got to wonder, well, what could you have done differently? Is it not something that you can maybe try to be responsible for and try to assist the employee a little bit more? Because yeah, I mean, if they just sort of give up and assume that the employee is just incapable, then I kind of feel like they're the ones who drop the ball.
Yeah, I agree. I think everybody has their part to play, right?
Yeah.
We're a workplace is an organization. It's a family. It's a series of relationships, however you want to look at it, that are working together. A series of cogs, whatever it is. If I'm not doing my part right, whatever that part is, we're going to fail. Um,
Yeah.
and I do see a lot of people. Uh, I like to say everybody is the hero of their own story, or at the very least, they're never the villain in their own
Sure.
story. So, getting people to try and focus, what could I have done differently? How could I have approached this differently? It can help them develop the skill, right? Because one thing for you, Darcy, tell Rob what I'm doing wrong. It's another thing to give me the skill, like you're saying, teach them how to fish. The skill to
Mhm.
identify, self-identify, what could I have done differently? What was my part in it? I like that. That's
Yeah.
I got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I want them to learn to guide, learn to be a part of the whole process, and to have an investment in their employees, right? And so they don't realize how important that is. Um, that every employee is so necessary, and if you're really neglecting any of them, then it can make the whole company culture fall apart. So
Yeah.
I see that happen a lot where we see these sort of one bad apple kind of bringing the whole company culture down, um, causing all kinds of problems. And as soon as you eliminate that person, they'll completely see everything change and get better.
Are,
So,
are there any signs that in your experience, you can look at a company and see some patterns and things that might be an indication that there's a manager or a person that's disrupting things in general?
well, I think they all know. What they don't realize is that it's probably been there's been signs since the very beginning, and it's later that they start going, oh, I sort of knew all along, right? And so I try to remind people, go with your gut if you're not sure about an employee, and there's all these red flags that keep coming up. So somebody who just is constantly complaining or passing blame, and just doesn't show up a lot. Clearly, even coming in late a lot is really kind of more of a sign of them not being really committed or invested in the company than anything
Mm.
else, right? And so there's a lot of little signs like that. But yeah, I think the employees who do the most complaining to start with, and then also are always trying to find ways to be absent. They're the biggest problems that most of my clients end up having, and then trying to figure out ways to then later get rid of them without being risk. And by that time, it's usually too late. They've already passed that point, and now we've got this employee who's made a complaint. They are on workers' comp, or they have some sort of medical issue, and they're on a disability or something. So, and then suddenly they're worried. Okay, now we can't. Now I feel like we can't do anything. We can't discipline them, or we can't terminate them because now they feel backed in a corner. And
Mhm.
it's always someone who they knew from the very beginning was going to end up being like this. So I always
I,
tell
I
people,
do
go with
think
your gut.
I do think trusting your gut, our instincts are good. Now, of course,
Yeah,
I always have to tell people, like, as the lawyer, when they say, well, they weren't a good fit, I'm like, well, let's quantify that. What does that look
yeah,
like? And some of the things you're talking about, oh, they're not showing up to work on time. They're not getting their work done. If it's a manager, we've got a number of their subordinates are not getting their work done, or
yeah.
their subordinates are complaining, or maybe there's been high turnover. How many of your clients you think are effectively using exit interviews as a way to evaluate the company's
Very few.
performance?
Very few. And some that do, I wonder why they are. Because I'll say, are you even using this information for any purpose?
Oh, so they may ask, but they're not doing anything with it.
Yeah, there's absolutely no point in doing exit interviews if you're not going to create some sort of survey or take that feedback and see what you can do to improve. And sometimes they just do it. And so also, why do you do it with someone who you're firing for cause? That's definitely awkward. And
Yeah.
so usually it's resignations, and then you ask them just to try to get the feedback. And I've got one client who does. They really take it to heart. Um, and they do it every time consistently. But the fact that they have such a high turnover is already kind of concerning. So, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the exit interview. I would hope that you already have a good enough relationship with your employees while they're working with you to know this information, right? And that
Well,
tells
if
me a
that was
lot.
true,
But
then I'd be out of a job. So I don't know that. Yeah.
that's which is exactly why I'm trying to advise my clients to avoid that. But yeah, I mean, if you've gotten to that point to the exit interview and they're giving this negative feedback, or they're telling you how a supervisor was doing this or that, or how much they hate something, I mean, I feel like it's already too late. Like,
Mhm.
why did you not know all this? What kind of communication did you have with your employees? Did you have an open door policy already? So
So I'm curious, what's your kind of in line with that? What's your opinion on, companies do performance reviews? I think that's usually a good idea. What do you think about the idea of having employees evaluate their managers and their supervisors?
I do like that. Yeah. A lot of companies do. They do the one that's for managers and the one that's for employees. Um, and again, that's one of those things where if you're not, I don't know what they're doing with that information, but if it's not being used to provide something constructive, then I don't see why they would. But I think it's only fair because a lot of times when you're doing performance reviews, the employee feels very attacked, and sometimes they feel like the reason why some of this is negative is because their manager wasn't providing them enough support, um, or they need more training, or they didn't understand something. Um, so how is that feedback provided if all they're getting is this sort of negative performance review?
And that's interesting about the negativity. I oftentimes see when we're trying to get people to change their behavior or change things, there's two classic ways, right? There's negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Both have benefits and drawbacks. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I really don't like when people are just giving criticisms and negative feedback all the time, and they don't bother to talk to the employees about what they're doing well, or concentrating on any of their strengths. And I would say, sadly, a majority of the managers kind of go into it that way, where they only think they have to tell the employee when they're doing something wrong. And they fail to ever think, how do I tell them they're doing something right? And some of them actually said, why do I have to tell them, give them, positive feedback when they're just doing their job? That's the job they're supposed to be doing,
Mhm.
right? Like they don't want to have to give someone kudos for something that they were supposed to be doing anyways. That's their job. I think that's not a very constructive tool for management.
I was talking to a friend about this. We were actually doing a presentation on communication, and the way she put it, and I thought it was great, and I steal it, is you're normalizing the feedback. When I tell you when you're
Yeah.
doing things well, I'm normalizing the communication so that when I tell you there's something I need you to do differently, it's not going to be this shock of why is my supervisor talking to me? Why is my manager talking to me? So that's, I think, a good way to point out, well, one, the positive reinforcement is always good to normalize it. The other thing is when you're doing good, I tell you that, hey, I really appreciate that you did that. That creates endorphins in your brain that triggers, and
Yeah.
you know, go back to Psych 101, BF Skinner with the positive reinforcement. It's like, oh, if
Yeah.
I do this, I'm going to get a cookie. Okay, well, I'm going to do it again.
Right, right. And it's not the same thing as like everybody gets a participation trophy type of thing that people are so afraid of. Which, yeah, there's maybe negatives about that, but that's not what this is. This is just saying that positive reinforcement can increase their morale and increase their performance. It makes it better. I mean, even if you look at coaches, um, basically when people are on a team where the coach is very positive and they love their coach, they actually do so much better than if they're on a team where the coach is yelling at them all the time and calling them names and putting them down and telling them how terrible they are. I mean, why
Mhm.
do you think that's going to make them a better um, person on the team, right? So it's with employees. It's like if you call your employee an idiot, do you think that's going to make them less of an idiot? Or what? How does that solve anything, right? That's
You're
only
just
going to
going to
make things
want
more negative.
you're just going to make me want to switch teams. You know, why would I want to deal with you if I show up to work
Yeah,
and I do hear that a lot from employees where they're just cringing having to go to work. It may not
yeah,
be the company has done anything illegal, but you're going to lose that employee. And that employee was valuable enough that you interviewed them, you recruited them, you've been paying them, and now you're going to have to start that all over again
yeah.
because there hasn't been the effective communication of how to get the most out of an employee.
Yeah, and a lot of people deal with that with managers where their manager is so negative all the time that, like you were saying, you go to a meeting and you're just like, oh, great, now what's going to happen in this meeting? It's going to be negative, right? And so they're fearing it. They're cringing every time that they need to meet with their boss. They're cringing about even coming to work, and that's terrible. I mean, if you've created that kind of work environment, I don't know why you thought that that was going to actually improve anything for the business or for anyone, right? So I think it's a very backwards way of thinking, and I'm not sure why there are so many managers who still kind of perform that way and they micromanage and they constantly criticize, and yet they're so frustrated because it's not working. To what, get them back online? You thought that that was going to work,
Right?
but then the opposite is like anytime you have worked for some great company and the boss is amazing, I mean, you've loved that job. You'll tell everybody else about how much you loved that job. And I mean, and overall, you're just going to get better performers.
Yeah. And I do think that oftentimes there is a misperception, going back to what we were talking about earlier, of I'm blaming my subordinates for not doing well. If I can turn around and again look at what is my role. Okay, maybe I have a bad employee, we'll call it, or somebody that's just not going to work out, and that does happen. I think that happens less frequently than many managers think. Just like I think many subordinate their perspectives of we've just got a bad manager is not necessarily it doesn't happen as much as they may think, but it does happen enough that it needs to be addressed. Do you ever do training like, hey, like I had a client, I did a sexual harassment prevention training. And as part of that, in the supervisor section, people had a lot of questions about how to address specific situations, and we were running out of time. So then the company hired me to come back just to talk to the managers on some effective management communication. Do you
Mhm.
ever do trainings like
I
that
do.
for individual companies or
Yes.
multiple companies?
I do. I do. I love doing effective management training. So, I mean, I do also do sort of 101. I mean, that's how a lot of these really small businesses actually need full on management 101 because they really don't know any of what they're supposed to be doing on a day to day as a manager. But I really like when I get to do effective management, which is people who already know all that and they just want to know how to be a better manager. And
Hmm.
companies who do that type of training, who consider themselves having a leadership team, they are so much more receptive. And you can tell they actually care about how do we improve our company by valuing our employees and improving communication with them. So I do love doing that. I wish I could do whole day workshops on that. I could talk to them for hours. But yeah, I think that's a really really important thing. I think most companies should do at some point or another because even a manager who's been doing it for years and years, you're not going to think of everything, and it's always nice to get a little refresher on how to improve the workplace.
I'm always coming up with ways that I can change or improve what I'm doing. Um, I'm not always open to seeing that. I will be honest about that. Um, but I think the more I can push myself and figure, okay, what could I have done differently? How should I do that differently? When I can get into that mindset, it really sets a different tone because now I'm also taking responsibility and ownership so that I can effectuate the change. Um,
Hmm.
on the trainings, What other types of do you do sexual harassment prevention training? Are there particular trainings that you do through One Resource?
Yeah, I do the harassment training. I do either live or webinar versions of it. I do try to do my training a little different, right? I've seen the trainings online. At some point or another, check them out, and they're pretty terrible, especially the one that the state provides for free. So I'm
Yeah.
always thinking about those, right? And also, I mean, a lot of the clients, I also have to see them multiple times, over the years. So I'm just like, how do I change this up? How do I freshen this up? How do I kind of make people laugh even at certain points?
Hmm.
How do I inspire them? And really, my whole focus throughout the whole thing is respect. How do I teach them how to just be respectful in the workplace? It seems like a very easy concept, but it's not, because otherwise, like you said, you wouldn't have a job. So it happens so much more than it should. And I even give examples all the time of scenarios with my clients because I've worked with so many different businesses. I have just a plethora of examples. So I'll give something because, you go over certain items and they're like, yeah, that would never happen. So boring, boring, right? But if I give examples, they'll kind of look at me like, what? No. Are you serious? That happened? That actually happened? People who would do that?
Right.
And the truth is, people are still doing those things, which is why there are lawsuits. Um, they're not all frivolous. There is still a lot of stuff that people are doing that is so inappropriate
Hmm.
and just really disrespectful in the workplace. And it's just sort of sad because I wonder about those people who are in the room. There's
Right.
always at
Which
least one person in the room that nobody knows is the reason.
that we're doing the training. Yeah, and one of the things I always talk about when I do my sexual harassment prevention training is, yeah, I think the EEOC had a task force like back in 2010 or something. Maybe it was before that to determine the effectiveness of sexual harassment prevention training on preventing sexual harassment. And they concluded it's not all that effective. Okay. But what they did conclude that what is the most effective thing is a top down. What is the message that those at the top are not only telling to other people, but what are they living? So if you
Yes.
have an executive that is exemplifying that behavior and then ensuring that
Yeah.
their subordinates and on down the line, that's going to be the most effective way to have a harmonious workplace.
Yeah, you got to tell them to lead by example. I mean, that's something I focus on with the management training a lot is this whole idea of you are in this role, you've been given this role for a reason, and you are a leader. You need to be a mentor. You need to take some responsibility for these employees, and you need to step up. And a lot of it comes down to leading by example.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you said, it's kind of top down. They need to make sure that they're not the ones who are the problem.
Yeah. What
So,
are the jokes that they're telling when they think nobody else is listening? And the
yeah,
number of times that I've seen like a text message or an email that's like, what, your manager did this and they're still a
yeah,
manager? What? I don't,
yeah.
what
I did
message
a
are we
training
sending?
one time. I did a training in person, a sexual harassment training. Um, and the manager that I worked with, that was sort of my main contact, was there. And afterwards, he said something about what I said was funny, and then he told me a sexist joke to give an example of a sexist joke. And
Hmm.
I thought, but why? But why would you just tell me that joke
Yeah.
after I just did a harassment training and you thought it was funny then to tell me a sexist joke because you're like, oh yeah, like this. I'm like, yes, that's an example of a
Yeah.
sexist joke. So yeah,
Sometimes, humans have a way of never disappointing and surprising me in some way.
yeah, yeah.
Darcy, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day. Again, those who want to contact you, what's the website or what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm at oneresourceconsulting.com, or they can just email me at Darcy at oneresourceconsulting, and it's DARCY, and they can reach out to me that way if they want to, just learn a little bit more about what kind of services I offer and how I can help them.
And I really can't recommend Darcy enough. I have recommended her on multiple occasions. Very knowledgeable, knows what she's doing. She's a wonderful person to talk to and bounce ideas off of and learn how to do things so that you don't have to call me. So, Darcy, thank
Ideally.
you so much. Have a wonderful day. And I
Yeah.
look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.